Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started. Afghanistan is in a churn and it is directly affecting India. A security advisory issued by the Indian mission in Afghanistan spells out how much is at stake and the kind of threat that Indian citizens and Indian interests face in Afghanistan. As the Taliban gains more power and turf, India has just stopped short of telling its people to leave. And it cannot ask them to leave because India is involved in 400-odd projects in Afghanistan. 400. The Americans may be pulling out troops, but India is not withdrawing from its development commitments. On Gravitas tonight, we'll give you a lowdown of what's at stake. How many Indians are we talking about? How much in terms of financial and diplomatic capital? What are India's options? Are talks with the Taliban really happening? Also, what kind of a threat does this churn pose to the security situation in Kashmir? There's a lot to discuss. Also on the show tonight, the Pakistani Prime Minister is caught between a rock and a hard place. Imran Khan says he's under pressure to pick a side, the United States or China. A new report flies in the face of all the headlines that talk about religious intolerance in India. It says that an overwhelming majority of Indians say that they are free to practice their religion in this country. Kim Jong-un has said that North Korea is facing a grave crisis. Is this an appeal to save North Korea from the Wuhan virus? And from the west to the east, a major heat wave is sweeping across the world. We'll tell you about this latest climate emergency in a special report. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
The U.S. National Institutes of Health says that India's indigenous Covaxin jab effectively neutralizes both the Alpha and Delta variants of coronavirus. The body conducted 2 studies on blood serum from people who had received the jab, made by India's Bharat Biotech. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson faced the heat in the House of Commons as opposition leader Keir Starmer accused him of trying to sweep under the carpet the scandal involving former Health Secretary Matt Hancock's affair. Johnson was also grilled about the EU settlement scheme and urged to do away with the deadline, which ends today. India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar raises the need for vaccine equity at the G20 foreign ministers meeting in Italy, saying that multilateralism has been found wanting. His remarks come in the wake of the European Union's opposition to India and South Africa's proposal to waive off intellectual property rules for vaccines. Rebel forces in conflict-hit Tigray region in Ethiopia seize control of regional capital Mekelle, leading to celebrations on the streets. Meanwhile, the Ethiopian government calls for a humanitarian ceasefire in the region in a major turning point in the civil war that has left thousands dead. Even as the government tries to ramp up vaccination, Russia reports 151,000 hospitalizations due to COVID-19 amid the spread of the contagious Delta variant. Worst-hit regions include capital Moscow and city of St. Petersburg. Russia's health minister calls the situation tense. A report by the Human Rights Watch says that the Chinese government has monitored, harassed and intimidated pro-democracy Chinese students in Australia. Tactics of intimidation have intensified in recent years, without much action from Australian universities, says the report. In his annual televised phone-in with Russians, President Vladimir Putin questions the point of meeting with Ukrainian leader Zelensky, since he believes Ukraine is in control of Western powers. On the topic of origins of the virus, Putin says it is irrelevant when compared to the dangers posed by it. A United Nations report pegs the economy damage of the pandemic on the tourism sector to be more than $4 trillion. The report finds that the lack of widespread vaccination in developing nations, which rely on tourism, to be a major factor adding to losses. Serena Williams' latest bid for a record-equaling 24th Grand Slam singles title has ended with an injury retirement in the first round of Wimbledon. The 39-year-old slipped twice on the grass in the first 7 games of her opener against Belarusian Alexandra Sasnovich and held back tears as she was forced to pull out with the scores locked at 3-all. Ukraine have completed the quarter-final lineup for Euro 2020 with a last-gasp 2-1 victory over Sweden in Glasgow. Alexander Zinchenko's 27th-minute opener was cancelled out by Marcus Berg in the first half, and both teams were denied by the woodwork after the interval. But Sweden had Marcus Danielsson sent off in the first period of extra time, and with penalties looming, Ukraine substitute Artem Dovbyk headed in the winner.
Indians are not safe in Afghanistan. They could become targets of kidnapping. That's the message that came out of Kabul last night. The Indian mission in Afghanistan issued a new security advisory. It barely stopped short of asking Indians to leave the country. The situation is indeed serious. We've been tracking and reporting it for weeks now. The Taliban is on the offensive, districts are falling like dominoes, and the Afghan security forces are scrambling to keep control. Now, there's a serious risk that Indians in Afghanistan could be caught in the crossfire. The Indian assessment of the situation in Afghanistan paints a dire picture. In its security advisory, the Indian embassy in Kabul said the situation remains dangerous in several provinces of Afghanistan, and that Indians face a serious threat of kidnapping as terror groups have escalated violent activities. And no points for guessing here, India is talking about the Taliban. The advisory mentions that Afghan forces, government institutions and even civilians have been targeted, and that Indian citizens should avoid all non-essential movement. They should remain discreet and maintain a high level of alertness. They should not take the same road to work every day. They've been advised to use different routes and to commute at different times. Basically, any predictable pattern of behavior or movement will put their lives at risk. That's how precarious the security situation is. So the obvious question, what are Indian citizens still doing in Afghanistan? Why are they risking their lives by staying there? The answer is this. America may be withdrawing troops, but India is not pulling out of its development commitments in Afghanistan. Despite the risks involved, India is pushing ahead with all its projects. So how many Indians are we talking about? More than 3,000. More than 3,000 Indian citizens are deployed in Afghanistan as we speak. Some of them are diplomats and aid workers, but most of them are engineers and staff. And they're all working on different kinds of development projects, hundreds of them. India is the largest regional donor in Afghanistan. It has pledged more than $3 billion to the war-hit country. Most of this money is going towards development projects. As of November last year, India was funding more than 400 projects. They're spread out across all 34 provinces of Afghanistan. And this is a matter of pride for India. While some forces like Pakistan are busy fueling conflict by backing terrorists, India is working for Afghanistan's growth and development. At the same time, keeping Indian citizens in Afghanistan safe is proving to be a big challenge. The Taliban is gaining power and turf, and their record vis-a-vis India has been poor, to say the least. Who can forget what happened in Kandahar? The Taliban hijacked Indian Airlines Flight 814 to get 3 terrorists released. This was 22 years ago. Now the same Taliban is set to call the shots again. And this could cast a shadow on Indian development efforts. Since the 1st of May, when the American forces began leaving Afghanistan, the Taliban has been on the offensive. As of Tuesday, they control more than 157 districts. That's more than 30% of Afghanistan under Taliban control. More than 30%. In the last 2 months alone, the Taliban has taken control of more than 80 districts. And they're not done yet. Multiple provincial capitals are under threat. While no province in Afghanistan has fallen yet, reports say a lot of them are surrounded by the Taliban. It's only a matter of time before they fall. This terrorist group is on the political high table now. World powers are engaging with the Taliban as a legitimate stakeholder, mostly because America has made a mess of the situation for 20 years and now wants to exit this costly war. But the repercussions will be suffered by the people and the neighbors of Afghanistan. So India is trying to adapt its strategy to this new reality. India is talking to the Taliban. Multiple reports confirm that an Indian delegation met with the Taliban in Doha, Qatar. We must underline here that India has not officially confirmed this meeting or these talks. But the recent visits of External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar to Doha are raising questions. He went to Doha twice within a week. Did he meet the Taliban there? Yes, says a journalist from Afghanistan. He says Jaishankar met with 3 top leaders of the Taliban, including Mullah Baradar, who is a co-founder of the Taliban and one of the chief negotiators for the peace deal. Apparently, the Taliban assured India that future relations will not be dictated by Pakistan. And New Delhi was quick to deny this claim. The Ministry of External Affairs has reportedly called it, quote-unquote, false, baseless and mischievous. Now, we cannot confirm what happened in Doha, but we can clearly see that India is not spoiled for choice here. Engaging with the Taliban has become an imperative, not just for the security of Indians and Indian interests in Afghanistan, but also to protect Kashmir. That's right, the churn in Afghanistan poses a challenge for Kashmir. That's because turbulence in this part of the world is rarely contained. It crosses borders, ballooning into a regional crisis. Neighbors inevitably get pulled in. And for India, Kashmir is the big worry. We are in the middle of peak infiltration season now, the summer months. This is usually when terrorists sneak into Kashmir. But the border has been relatively quiet this time. This is what Indian officials reported in early June. 100 days of zero infiltrations and ceasefire violations. 100 days. New Delhi wants to keep it that way. But if things escalate in Afghanistan, that could change. Let me explain why. The last time the Taliban were in power, terrorists ran riot. They had a free pass to mobilize, to cross borders and to spread terror. Standing ready to help them was Pakistan. This story dates back to the 1980s. Back then, America was training insurgents against the Soviet Union. Their biggest mistake? Roping in Pakistan. So the Pakistanis taught the insurgents a lot more than fighting. They were radicalized. Afghan insurgents became jihadi war machines. And in 1989, they routed the Soviets. Mission successful. But what next? Where would these radicalized insurgents go? Pakistan started sending them across the border to Jammu and Kashmir. Now, if you look at the chronology, it fits perfectly. Kashmiri separatism in 1989 was nationalist. It was a homegrown affair. But in the early 1990s, it became radical and Islamist. Could a repeat be on the cards then? The Taliban themselves may not send terrorists to Kashmir, but there are more sinister groups biding their time. And chief among them is the Al-Qaeda. They thrive during chaos, and that's precisely where Afghanistan is heading, civil war and chaos. In February 2020, the Taliban promised to cut ties with Al-Qaeda, but there's no evidence that they have. Instead, the Al-Qaeda has become emboldened. They're attacking journalists, activists, and women leaders. Last month, terror attacks claimed more than 4,300 lives, and most of them were perpetrated by Al-Qaeda. Let me pull up a United Nations report on the Taliban-Al-Qaeda nexus. I'll show you the key findings. Number 1, the Al-Qaeda still operates under the Taliban safety umbrella. Finding number 2, the nexus has grown deeper with bonds of marriage and in some cases second-generation ties. Number 3, Al-Qaeda operates in at least 15 Afghan provinces. That's nearly half the country. Their leadership is based in the Pak-Afghan border region. And number 4, Al-Qaeda is lying low to help the Taliban. They're keeping things quiet since the Taliban is getting an image makeover. What's the takeaway here? The Al-Qaeda is not going anywhere. They're just waiting for the Americans to leave. The next question is, how long before they fix their eyes on Kashmir? The Americans have prepared a threat assessment. This is what Pentagon Chief Lloyd Austin reported to the Congress.
How would you rate the likelihood of international terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda and ISIS regenerating inside of Afghanistan and presenting a threat to our homeland or our allies, given what you see today?
I would assess it as medium. I would also say, Senator, that it would take possibly 2 years for them to develop that capability.
2 years. That's what the Pentagon thinks. But remember, this assessment is for America. Al-Qaeda may not take as long to strike in the neighborhood. They already have multiple sleeper cells in the subcontinent, not to mention dozens of jihadist offshoots. One of them is the TRF, the Resistance Front, TRF. This group has carried out a string of attacks in Kashmir. Indian intelligence suggests that they are a smokescreen used by the Lashkar-e-Toiba. So their godfather is Pakistan. India must be wary of this new nexus in Kashmir, the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, TRF nexus. Here's the worst case scenario. Afghanistan descends into chaos. Al-Qaeda uses this window to mobilize. Their sleeper cells in India are activated and months of relative peace in Kashmir is disrupted. How can New Delhi prepare against this? The first step is to watch out for recruitment. In the last 2 decades, Al-Qaeda has lost fighters. A reviving terror group needs manpower to radicalize young minds in India, especially in states with a history like Kashmir and Kerala. The second step is to secure the home front. What does that mean? Bringing elections to Kashmir. And things are moving in that direction. Elected local leaders will be key to tackling radicalization. As I said at the start, this turbulence will spread. India needs to fasten the seatbelts and be on high alert, because peace in Kashmir depends to a certain extent on peace in Kabul. Meanwhile, in Islamabad, Prime Minister Imran Khan has confessed that he is being pressurized by Western powers to pick a side, that he is being forced to choose between the United States and China. He said this in a TV interview to China's state broadcaster CGTN. And going by Imran Khan's tone, it seems that he's indeed in a dilemma. Islamabad cannot afford to offend Beijing, its partner in crime. Neither can it afford to let go of Washington, its largest export market. So what's it going to be? Our next report explores.
Islamabad is facing a new conundrum. Should it embrace the new administration in Washington, or should it stick to obeying its masters in Beijing? The dilemma is real. Imran Khan has confessed. He says Western powers are forcing him to pick a side.
So it creates problem because what United States is doing is it's formed this regional alliance called the Quad, which is US, India, and then a couple of other countries. So from that point of view, Pakistan thinks that it is very unfair for the US or other powers, Western powers, for countries like us to take sides. And, it's not going to happen that if there's pressure put on Pakistan to change its relationship or downgrade its relationship with China, it won't happen.
It's not going to happen, says the Prime Minister. The way he puts it makes it seem that Pakistan is the most sought-after ally. But in reality, it is the one quoting both sides. Pakistan cannot afford to annoy China. Neither can it afford to let go of America. It is indebted to both sides for more than one reason. Let's start with China, which is Pakistan's largest defense supplier, accounting for 58.4% of all defense imports. It is also Pakistan's largest foreign investor, providing $501 million as FDI in 2020 alone. It is also the biggest source of modern infrastructure, having invested $62 billion to build highways, railways, power stations and ports under the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. China is the loudest voice in support of Pakistan against sanctions and resolutions at global platforms. It also helps Islamabad pay back loans to the many countries it has borrowed from. Cut to the chase. Islamabad and Beijing are as thick as thieves. But Washington and Islamabad also enjoy a patron-client relationship. The United States exercises some considerable leverage in Pakistan. It is the top donor country when it comes to grant-based assistance. America has provided over $5 billion in civilian assistance and $1 billion as humanitarian relief since 2009. If China is the largest source of imports, America is Pakistan's largest export market, accounting for $3.71 billion worth of exports in 2018 alone. Pakistan is feeding off both countries. The problem is that the US wants Pakistan to do more on terror and the Afghan peace process. The common sentiment across US administrations has been that Pakistan was the reason America lost the war in Afghanistan. And it continues to fuel militancy by harboring Taliban terrorists. There's also a trust deficit when it comes to Pakistan's actions against terror emanating from its soil. And of course, there's the never-ending closeness to China, America's self-declared enemy number one. As the confrontation between Beijing and Washington rages, Islamabad is finding it rather tough to navigate their sensitivities. And going by Imran Khan's tone, Pakistan's balancing act is about to come crashing down.
Pakistan thinks that it is very unfair for the US or other powers, Western powers, for countries like us to take sides. There's pressure put on Pakistan to change its relationship or downgrade its relationship with China. It won't happen.
Bureau Report, WION World is One.
The Lancet is one of the world's oldest and best-known medical journals, but right now it is caught in the crossfire between the United States and China over the origins of the pandemic. The journal has been conducting its own assessment of the pandemic, and China is not happy about it. Why? Because they are talking about the possibility of a lab leak. Beijing claims that the Lancet is under pressure from the US government to investigate the Wuhan laboratory. The head of Lancet's investigation has denied this. He says there is no outside pressure. But now an internal debate is underway. Remember last year, Lancet had dismissed the possibility of a lab leak. Now it has been forced to reconsider it. Its own credibility has come under question. In the early days of the pandemic, Lancet ran an editorial. It completely ruled out the possibility of a lab leak. This is what it looked like. It ended with a declaration. We declare no competing interests. The signatories claimed that they had no conflict of interest. It turns out that wasn't the case. This letter was engineered by a certain Peter Daszak, the man who was funding research at the Wuhan laboratory through American grants. Peter Daszak himself is a signatory to this letter. He claimed that he had no conflict of interest when he clearly had one. But the Lancet took Daszak at his word and published the letter. When the whole funding story unraveled and Daszak made headlines, Lancet tried some damage control. It made an embarrassing addendum to the old letter. And Peter Daszak recused himself from the Lancet Commission that is studying the virus and its origins. Last week, we spoke to Nicholas Wade, a prominent science author and journalist. His research put the focus back on the lab leak theory recently. He raised questions on the role of medical journals like the Lancet. He said that they put their thumb on the scale. They backed the natural origins theory without any concrete evidence. What does this say about the credibility of journals like the Lancet and others that dismiss this theory without due diligence?
They have put their thumb on the scale in favor of natural emergence and against lab leak when they had no evidence for doing so. There was no reason to favor one theory over another. And Nature should have allowed both sides to present their views. That's the duty of a leading scientific journal. Instead, Nature published letters from the virologists who dismissed lab leak, and not only that, it has put warning notices on various other papers it has published.
It's not just the possibility of a lab leak. Apparently, the Lancet was also reluctant to take on China on the issue of human rights. Thomas Schultz is a prominent German psychiatrist. Earlier this year, he sent a proposal to Richard Horton, who is the editor-in-chief of The Lancet. He asked The Lancet to start a debate on the complicity of Chinese scientists in the persecution of Uyghurs. He was alarmed by some reports from Xinjiang that said that China was gathering genetic data, enforcing sterilization campaigns, harvesting the organs of Uyghurs. Here is what the letter said. We believe that the human rights situation in China has become unbearable and of unprecedented scope, that we cannot stay silent any longer and at least need to have an open discussion in the best academic tradition. Now, reports say the Lancet responded to this question with a flat no. Apparently, they did not want to do anything that might, quote-unquote, imperil the Lancet's editor in China. Basically, they did not want to offend the Chinese. The medical journal now seems to have had a change of heart. It wants to, and I'm quoting again, it wants to carefully scrutinize the origins of the virus. So as it sits down to reassess the facts, the Lancet must also reassess its own role. It should explain the compromised letters and the charges of editorial bias. News feeds narratives. And which news story gets traction shows which narrative is being pushed. So sporadic incidents involving religious minorities make front page news, even international headlines that promptly brand India an intolerant country. But here's a survey that may not make the headlines or the front page. That's because this survey says that religious freedom is not a problem in India. This is a Pew Research survey, and for those of you unaware, the Pew Research Center is one of the world's biggest think tanks. It provides data on public issues and trends shaping the world. Now, before the pandemic hit us, this center carried out a face-to-face survey of nearly 30,000 Indian adults. It was conducted in 17 languages and apparently covered all Indian states. The study has come up with 10 interesting findings. We've compiled the top ones for you. Number one, an overwhelming number of Indians say they enjoy religious freedom. They live religiously segregated lives but value religious tolerance. They say respecting other religions is very important for them. This includes people in all 6 major religious groups in India. Look at these figures. 91% Hindus said that they are free to practice their religion. 89% Muslims said that they are free to practice their faith. For Christians, it's the same, 89%. For Sikhs, 82%. Buddhists, 93%. Jains, 85%. Where is the intolerance? Look at another set of numbers. Respecting all religions as a core Indian value. 85% Hindus said that respecting all religions is very important to being Indian. 78% Muslims believe the same. So do 78% Christians. 81% Sikhs, 84% Buddhists, and 83% Jains. There's more on national identity. For many Hindus, their national identity, religion, and language are closely connected. Look at this graph. 64% Hindus said that being Hindu is very important to being truly Indian. 59% said that speaking Hindi is very important to being Indian. 51% said that both are equally important to being truly Indian. Now, the third finding is very interesting. The study says that dietary laws are central to the religious identity of many Indians. Nearly 3/4 of Hindus said that is close to 72% believe that a person cannot be Hindu if they eat beef. Similarly, more than 3/4 of Muslims, nearly 77%, believe that a person cannot be Muslim if they eat pork. The fourth key finding, the study says India's caste system continues to fracture society. A large share of Indians believe that it is important to not marry into other castes. And this is regardless of their faith and gender. 63% Hindu men believe that people must not marry outside their caste. 64% of Hindu women believe the same. And in the case of Muslims, 70% men and 74% women believe that they should not marry outside their caste. And the last and the most striking finding is this. India's religious groups share several religious practices and beliefs. The survey says that after living side by side for generations, India's minority groups hold beliefs and engage in practices that are more closely associated with Hindu traditions than their own. The examples being given are these. The bindi, a decorative mark worn by Indian women on their foreheads. It's not just the Hindus who wear one. Look at these figures. Similarly, the belief that the river Ganga has the power to purify. It's prevalent across religions, not limited to Hindus. Also, the concept of karma. A Hindu belief that what goes around comes around, that the sum of a person's actions in this or past life will decide their fate in the future. Hindus believe in it, as do an equal number of Muslims and a remarkably high number of people from other religions. Now, what do all of these findings, all of these numbers tell you? That India is a diverse and devout country, that there are differences and there are similarities. There are challenges, but also the sensibility to not let these challenges spill into conflicts. And above everything else, people hold strong views and are not shy of expressing them. They enjoy religious freedom and value religious tolerance. This is the story of India told in numbers, not prejudiced narratives. The Wuhan virus crisis may be getting out of control in North Korea. Why do we say this? Because North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has reportedly sacked several top party officials. They have been punished for ushering in, quote-unquote, a great crisis, one that can lead to grave consequences. These are the words of Kim Jong-un, and reporting on them is the North Korean state agency KCNA. Question: how often does it report on crisis in North Korea? Almost never. How often does it tell the world about failures of the ruling party? Never. What's happening right now is unprecedented, and this may be North Korea sending out an SOS signal to the world.
This is the World Health Organization's Wuhan virus dashboard. The darker the shade of a country, the higher its COVID tally. Only 2 countries are coded in yellow. One of them is North Korea. 0 confirmed cases, 0 deaths. In the early months of 2020, North Korea closed its borders. It stopped international flights, blocked international aid. In the months that followed, Pyongyang told the world that it is COVID-free. This even as recently as the 14th of June. Tested 30,000 people, found no virus. 2 weeks later, headlines talk about a grave Wuhan virus incident, a top-level meeting, and top party officials being sacked. 0 to grave in 2 weeks is not possible. The Wuhan virus sure spreads fast, but not this fast. So, what exactly is happening in North Korea? Experts agree it always had confirmed cases of the virus. Now, the situation may have gone out of control. North Korea is a country of over 25 million people. It does not have the infrastructure or resources required to protect these many people from a healthcare crisis. So, North Korea is finally reaching out for help. How? For starters, it is no longer pretending to be COVID-free. While sacking top Politburo members, Kim Jong-un acknowledged a huge crisis at home. How do we know this? through the KCNA, or Korean Central News Agency. The Hermit Kingdom is sending distress signals through the state-owned agency. The KCNA never reports on internal issues, but it is doing so now. What's more, it's talking about internal politics. KCNA says Kim called out Politburo members for their lack of ability, scolded them for self-protectionism and passiveness. What explains this kind of reporting? Lesson number 1 from the dictator's playbook: a dictator is never wrong. Hitler blamed the Jews for the collapse of the German society. Kim Jong-un is using party members as scapegoats. What next? North Korea is entitled to 1.9 million doses of vaccines under the COVAX alliance. But the shipment has not been delivered, as North Korea has stopped foreign aid workers and medical experts from entering the country. So why can't Pyongyang simply reverse this and reach out for help directly? Lesson number 2. A dictatorial regime can never appear weak. Asking for help directly will be a sign of weakness. It will hammer the legitimacy of Kim's rule. Hence, distress calls encrypted in media reports. Bureau Report, WION. World is One.
A Western armada has descended on the Black Sea. They're testing one man's resolve and patience, Russian President Vladimir Putin. These are the largest war games in decades. They're calling it Sea Breeze 2021. As far as names go, it's far from perfect. There is nothing breezy or calm about this drill. It's all about sending a stern military message. First, let me give you some background. Sea Breeze is organized by the United States and Ukraine. They've been doing it since 1997, but this year's edition may by far be the biggest. 30 countries are participating, 5,000 soldiers, 18 special forces, 32 ships and 40 aircraft. That's a lot of firepower to park in a volatile sea. America pays for Sea Breeze and Ukraine hosts it. That is the arrangement. Until 2014, it was a routine military drill. But after Russia annexed Crimea, the dynamic changed. The stakes were a lot higher. Sea Breeze became a show of force against Russia. And this edition takes it to another level. Land, sea and airborne exercises have been planned. They will continue through July 10th. The objective is to bring Ukraine up to speed. In 2014, Russia barely broke a sweat invading Crimea. The two countries and their militaries were a clear mismatch. Sea Breeze attempts to bridge this gap to show that Ukraine is not alone anymore. But there's a flip side to this drill, and that's a Russian backlash. Moscow will be watching these exercises closely, and it won't like what it sees: a hostile armada sailing in neighboring waters. Just last week, Russia in fact fired warning shots in the Crimean Sea. They accused a British warship of violating their borders. So both sides are flexing their muscle. Stuck in the middle is Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelensky wants to join NATO. It's the only way he can protect his eastern border. But why is NATO hesitating? Admitting Ukraine would be a Cold War declaration. It's the red line for President Putin. So for both sides, this is a delicate choice. The other option is talks, but the Russian president believes that meeting Zelensky is pointless. This is what he said today.
Why should I meet with Zelensky when he has given up his country to full external control? Vital issues for Ukraine are not resolved in Kyiv, but in Washington and partly in Berlin and Paris. What is there to discuss? However, I don't refute meetings like that. We only need to understand what to discuss.
Nobody is questioning Putin's appetite or his intent. But what is his assessment about the Black Sea? What happens next in this conflict? The Russian president has made one thing clear: sailing in Crimean waters is a provocation. And next time, it won't be warning shots. Moscow is threatening to sink hostile vessels near Crimea. Now, for most countries, this would be a declaration of war. But President Putin does not see it that way. He believes that Russia has enough firepower to deter its rivals.
You have said that the world was on the verge of the World War. Of course not. Even if we had sunk the British destroyer near Crimea, it is unlikely that the world would have been on the verge of World War III. Those who do it know that they cannot emerge the winners of this war.
That confidence should worry America and its allies. It's one thing to wage a Cold War, but sinking ships? There is no coming back from that. Russia has already drawn the battle lines and Ukraine is on the other side. So where do things go from here? It's a question of who blinks first. Earlier this year in eastern Ukraine, it was Russia. After weeks of troop build-up, they retreated. Was that a dress rehearsal? Or is it the new Russian strategy, keeping the West on its toes, never attacking, but always threatening? And if that is the Russian strategy, how will the West respond? How long can they delay Ukraine's NATO entry? So many war games, so much military posturing. What happened to good old diplomacy? Europe is still refusing to talk to Putin. And the Russian president does not want to meet Zelensky. So both sides are left guessing, placing dangerous wagers on what could happen next. Add some nuclear bombs to the equation, and you have a full-blown crisis. Speaking of, have you been complaining about the hot and humid weather here in India? Well, you're not alone if you are. From the Americas to West and South Asia, heat wave is sweeping the planet. 47 degrees almost in Canada. Record-breaking temperatures are proving to be fatal for hundreds of people. Our next report tells you more about this climate emergency.
It is unbearably hot in New Delhi. You can't see it, but you can feel the temperature rising every day. Weather watchers agree. With temperatures soaring above 40 degrees Celsius, India's national capital is in the middle of a heat wave. And it is not alone. A record-breaking heat wave is sweeping the planet, kicking off a climate emergency, one that may return with summer every year. In some parts of Western Canada, it is hotter than Dubai. Since Friday last week, the province of British Columbia has reported more than 230 deaths due to this heat wave. 60 temperature records were broken in British Columbia on Sunday, including the all-time temperature record. A village in the province reported a temperature of 49.5 Celsius. The mercury beat the previous high of 45 degrees Celsius, set in the year 1937. Experts say a dome of heat sits over Western Canada and parts of the United States, where high-pressure air is trapping the heat. The United Nations is calling the situation exceptional and dangerous.
This is obviously a part of the world which is more accustomed to cool weather. Temperatures are likely to reach as high as around 45 degrees Celsius by day for perhaps 5 or more days. So that's, very long spell, and with extremely warm nights in between.
In other parts of the world, the situation is worse. In Iraq, temperatures are rising above 52 degrees. People are unable to work, even from home. Several Iraqi cities have now curtailed office working hours. There is an acute shortage of power too. Earlier this week, the Iraqi electricity minister resigned after Iran halted the electricity supplies to Iraq over non-payment of dues. Iran itself is struggling with a heat wave, just like Kuwait, Oman, the UAE, Pakistan. Even ice-cold Russia is complaining about hot weather. The region of Siberia reported a temperature of 48 degrees Celsius. Warming temperatures are melting layers of permafrost, a permanently frozen layer of ice that covers around 2/3 of Russia's land area. The Russian president believes if the permafrost melts, it will have serious repercussions for the country.
Let me recall, permafrost is a frozen soil from tens to hundreds of meters in depth, more than a kilometer in some places. We have residential areas and infrastructure there. If everything starts melting there, social and economical consequences will be very serious.
All this fits into a pattern of weather events. The Earth is now behaving like a pressure cooker, where heat is trapped in different pockets that leads to extreme heat waves and high temperatures that are just too hot for even healthy people to survive outdoors. Everything signals towards a climate emergency, one that is still being ignored by world leaders. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
We have Father's Day, Mother's Day, Sister's Day, Earth Day, Yoga Day, a day dedicated to everyone and everything important. Well, we also have Social Media Day. It's only fair given its growing role in our lives. Today, social media is almost indispensable. Now, this may be an unpopular opinion, but just think about it. Imagine waking up one morning and finding yourself without any social media. Where will you find the day's trending stories? What will you scroll through when bored? Where will you find viral videos? How will you expand your professional circle? Learn about job openings. According to one study, 73% of millennials have found their jobs on social media. Back in 1997, no one had a clue that social media will one day become the center of our universe. Why 1997? Because that's when 6degrees.com went live. It was the world's first social media platform. Users could connect to their friends, family members, send them messages, post bulletins. Then came Friendster, MySpace, and Zing. In 2004, Facebook was launched from a Harvard dorm. And the rest, as they say, is history. At least 3.96 billion people today are active on social media. That's almost 49% of the world's population. 63% of those above the age of 13 are on social media. 63%. 29% of India's population is active on social media. 70% of America's population. 71% of Australians. We spend an average of 2 hours and 24 minutes on social media every day. That's more than the time most of us spend talking to our friends or family. If we continue spending this much time on social media every day, then by the end of our lives, we would have spent 5.7 years on social media. That's our middle school and high school years combined. Social media has become the go-to platform for communication. Whether we have to ping a friend, look for an old acquaintance, reach out to a recruiter, issue a complaint, it's all done on social media. And it was to recognize social media's role in communication that back in the year 2010, the 30th of June was marked as Social Media Day. Look at the calendar. What's the date today? The day comes on the heels of Facebook establishing itself as a $1 trillion company. The story of social media, you see, is not all flowers and rainbows. It is milestoned by good, bad and ugly. Let's talk about the good first. Social media has literally been a lifesaver this pandemic. It helped us transition to work from home. It made online learning easier. It helped us stay connected to our family, fitness goals. Social media also helped millions send out and respond to SOS calls for beds, oxygen, life-saving drugs. So full credit where it's due. But does social media's bad outweigh its good? You see, social media has made us asocial. It has contributed immensely in reducing in-person communication. The hours we spend online have affected our body image, our mental health. According to one study, 87% of women and 65% of men compare their bodies to images that they see on social media. 50% of these women and 37% of these men compare their bodies unfavorably. The problem is exacerbated by social media challenges and filters. Then there's cyberbullying. According to one estimate, 43% of teens are or have been bullied online. In 58% of these cases, parents or adults never find out. Social media can be really toxic. And despite that, at least 210 million people across the world are addicted to it. They can't stop scrolling through it. Why is that bad, you ask? A study found that teens who spend 5 hours on their phones are twice as likely to exhibit depressive symptoms. Social media has also been linked to anxiety, loneliness, suicide, and what's known as FOMO, the fear of missing out, FOMO. Today, 89% of undergraduate students experience phantom vibration. It's a feeling that their phone is vibrating when it isn't. Experts say people crave receiving notifications so much that they start imagining them. Social media is coming between us and a good night's sleep. 10% of teens check their phones more than 10 times per night. 45% of students check their phones after going to bed. In a study conducted in the UK, 68% of students admitted that using their phones at night affects their schoolwork. What about adults? Studies say 13% of total work productivity is lost to social media negligence. Think about it. How many of us can say that we have never checked Instagram in the middle of important work? Or missed out on key points during a meeting because we were occupied online? Or you were shopping on social media? I know I speak for a lot of us when I say that social media has started controlling our lives and the choices we make. We eat a certain type of food because it makes for a better post online. We look for destinations that are Instagrammable. We buy products that are promoted online, wear clothes that are trendy, consume information that is trending. Today we live online. Social media companies virtually control our lives, and now they want to control our governments as well, our countries. And this is where the story becomes ugly, from bad to ugly. Social media companies have become so powerful that they're becoming the biggest threat to the rule of law. They want to interfere with governance. Companies like Facebook and Twitter are blackmailing elected legislators, fighting with almost every major country and government. They're flouting rules, openly challenging the law, blocking free speech in some cases, blocking journalism. On this show, we often talk about digital colonization. So I'll wrap tonight's show by asking you a question. Does Social Media Day call for a celebration? Or does it come with a reminder to try and spend more time offline? To try and mute notifications, log out from the virtual reality, live in the real world, and draw a hard line for social media companies and put a hard stop to their colonial dreams? I'll leave you with this food for thought and some images as always, Gravitas images. Thanks very much for watching.